Good morning on this Sunday, April 14th. Here's a look at our top stories on the Georgia gang. Governor Brian Kemp makes a public plea to Congress over disaster relief for Georgia farmers. The mayor of Columbus is one step closer to running for U.S. Senate, and the new Georgia ethics chief is going after the Stacey Abrams campaign. Phil, Alexis, and Theron are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia gang starts now.
Hello, everyone. The words of Brian Kemp this week: we have reached a low point as a nation. This as he sent a message to Congress that it's time to bring disaster relief to Georgia farmers. Governor Kemp and Georgia Agriculture Commissioner Gary Black were not mincing words when it comes to Congress's inaction on federal disaster relief. No deal means no help for Georgia's farmers. Many were dealt massive losses after Hurricane Michael wiped out crops last October.
This is not an empty threat from a red state governor. This is a promise. We will not stand down until Congress stands up for our farmers.
The governor says Congress is not recognizing the urgency of the $3 billion in losses to the pecan industry, as well as other damages. Georgia has come up with $75 million for agricultural loans, helping 274 families, but that's not nearly enough.
There's only so much that we can do. We're talking about, $3 billion worth of losses here in the state. We do not have that kind of money laying around that we can just use until the federal government acts.
Now, the federal bill has stalled because President Trump and congressional Democrats can't work out a deal on how much aid to deliver to Puerto Rico, which is still suffering after Hurricane Maria hit there 2 years ago. Theron, this is such a shame for those Georgia farmers.
It is, and I think, one of the things that was interesting to me, Lori, is that when I looked at, we've now been over 2 years since 2017 when Hurricane Maria happened to Puerto Ricans, and then thus far they've only received $11 billion, and I think they're asking for much more than that. And so I definitely think that the argument between whether the Puerto Ricans deserve the disaster relief versus the farmers shouldn't be happening in Congress. I think they should all get in the room and try to work it out. But Congressman David Scott, our very own Georgia congressman, I think put it into context. He said it seems to have moved on, referring to the issue relief fund with the president. Disaster relief isn't as sexy of an issue like health care reform or building the wall. And so I think what's happening now, this president is really, he dibbled and dabbled a little bit about health care reform, said he wasn't going to deal with that until after the election, but he's still trying to push through funding for his wall, and we know that Democrats have locked down. But I think that Governor Kemp is exactly right. These farmers, these people who have hit very, very hard in some of our most impacted rural areas in our state deserve that funding. And I think that congressional Republicans and congressional Democrats, as I mentioned, David Scott, are talking about how to work together with the state to get these funds that they deserve.
Well, I want to mention Austin Scott too, Congressman Austin Scott, because he also had some remarks where he's also said the president has obviously moved on, and he says, quote, certainly no one would have stood in the way of disaster relief for states like Vermont or New York, but rural Americans, we've been forgotten. And Phil, let me ask you, because it seemed that Senator David Perdue and Senator Johnny Isakson were so close. They were really optimistic just a few weeks ago.
Well, they were, and I think we've missed something. The usual unfair attack on the president here by Theron. No, Senator Isakson actually had a compromise just a few days ago, and the Democrats rejected that. And yes, it is over Puerto Rico and other parts of the country, including South Georgia, that's of course devastated. Puerto Rico has not spent all of its relief money, which is aggravating. And they're still being promised billions of dollars in the future. So I agree that, yeah, they ought to sit down, but Senator Isakson, backed by the president, did a reasonable compromise for South Georgia, and the Democrats said no. And I think that's sad when the opposition party is not going to get any relief because it's Georgia and parts of Alaska and other areas. I think it's sad, and I blame the Democrats here. Senator Isakson is respected on both sides of the aisle. I was actually shocked that the Democrats rejected the Isakson proposal backed by President Trump.
But this is something that President Trump, we know that one of the things, I'm going to compliment him, is that if he gets behind something that he really believes in, he's going to exhaust all of his power to do so. This all started with President Trump's inability to work with his own party.
The Democrats control the House, and they've locked down.
But it was not prioritized, Phil.
Well,
what was prioritized was building this worthless wall.
Well, you've always hated the wall. You want open borders.
And then he was talking about health care reform, which he punted on. But I'm saying that farmers getting this relief should have been at the top of his priority, not building a wall. Do you not agree with that?
I actually actually say health reform is being worked on by the Republicans in the
No,
Senate.
he punted on that.
And no, he didn't, and that's just a lie. Both parties are looking at it. He said we're going to
do it. Then he said we're going to wait
Yes, he
till after the
did. But
election.
Mitch McConnell and the president have agreed that we're going to tweak things now because Obamacare was so screwed up.
Alexis,
dear
let me
goodness.
ask you, where's the compromise here?
Well, they need to find one for sure because people need this relief and this assistance. But I do think that the Democrats are fighting for relief for everyone, not just some. And that's what the issue is. And the compromise does not satisfy that wish.
Well,
to
the
have
Democrats
everybody
shot
taken care
down
of.
the Isakson compromise.
And Hurricane Maria that devastated Puerto Rico was done, 2 years ago.
And they haven't spent all their money.
But that doesn't have anything to do with what the money that they need.
We can shift the money over. Puerto Rico wants more money. Shift it over to Georgia and Alaska and elsewhere.
All right, we're going to move on. I want to stay with Governor Brian Kemp because this week we found out where he stands on the airport bill. He kept a secret all throughout the session, and he says, quote, "Be thankful as Georgians, nothing actually happened on the airport takeover bill." Phil.
How about that?
Well, I'm actually thankful, too, that nothing happened, that we didn't get a $50 million giveaway to Delta on behalf of the taxpayers, so I'm glad that didn't happen. I think what's going to, and we talked about it last week, I think what's going to happen is you're seeing the start of a negotiation for next January. Just for readers trying to figure this out, there's obviously a state authority takeover bill that's live that'll go into January. Then there's a Delta fuel exemption, other carriers exemption that'll go over into January. And of course, then there's a rural transit component that I hope is separated from all of that. It was a mess, as we discussed last week on day 40. So I actually had to chuckle. I think the governor and Burt Jones, the author of the oversight bill, is going to get together, probably Lieutenant Governor Duncan. I actually think, just as a last point,
oversight is takeover.
I think is an interesting point. Remember under the Democrats years ago, if you know your history, the Democrats feuded from the House and the Senate, Zell Miller versus Speaker Tom Murphy. I think we're seeing, and maybe feud is the wrong word, but we're seeing divergent views that they have to get together.
Right.
Darren, was it smart for the governor to stay out of this one? Because obviously Governor Nathan Deal would have weighed in really early and just put a stop to it.
Well, the one thing I tried to do, Lori, I could not find an AJC headline, and I want to just talk to my good friend Kevin Riley of the AJC. They didn't print in big letters, airport takeover failed during the judge's legislature. So, Phil, I was so happy. I was trying to find one.
Alive.
But no, but it failed this quarter. But no, listen, I was at the Rotary Club event where the governor spoke. He took 4 questions. And the 4th question was, what do you think the future of the Atlanta airport takeover bill is going to do? The governor jokingly said, hey, I want to call my good friend Theron Johnson up here to talk about this. But he was joking. Of course, I didn't go up to the podium. But what the governor said also, Lori, is that I support this mayor. I think that she's doing the right thing to put in some processes, but we got to continue to have a conversation about those procurement processes. But he also said, I support this legislature, and I want to continue to have support with them too. So he kind of came right down the middle. So I wasn't surprised at all that he kept quiet. He kept his word on that. But then I think he said that, look, if it had happened, it would have basically put the state in a very, very difficult position. And he basically said he's thankful that it didn't happen in this session. So I think what you're going to see now is you're going to see the speaker, who also played a pivotal role in stopping the takeover as well. He deserves a lot of credit. But you're going to see the city, the state, and everyone get together to make sure that we defeat this takeover attempt that's going to be ushered in again by Senator Burt Jones next year.
Well, it's not going away, but he was disappointed that the Delta tax break, we call it that, on jet fuel did not go through.
Yeah, he was, and I think that he said, hey, he wants to do everything he can to try to continue to support don't cut me off, support the biggest private employer that we have in the state. So I think he's going to find that out. And look, rural transit is also going to come up as well.
Well, what you're missing is there are going to be more indictments coming down the road. The whole reason for the oversight authority, state authority, is to stop the corruption that's been going on for 40 years. You forget to mention that. And that's what the problem is. And if there's more indictments, it just feeds into why we need a state authority.
But the indictments would come from the prior administration and this administration.
Not necessarily.
Well, we'll see. But
We know that we don't know, Phil.
Oh, listen, I have my sources.
All right, well, there's definitely more to come. And coming up, Columbus Mayor Teresa Tomlinson starts an exploratory committee for U.S. Senate, and why Senator David Perdue may be in a good spot in his bid for re-election. We discuss next.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Columbus Mayor Teresa Tomlinson took the first official step to challenge Republican Senator David Perdue, filing the paperwork to form an exploratory committee. There's a caveat on whether she officially enters the race, though, or not. That caveat, of course, is Stacey Abrams, as we wait to see if she'll run for the U.S. Senate, president, or governor. Alexis,
yeah,
where are we?
Where are we? Well, that's the $64,000 question for those of you who are old enough to know that reference. But,
I am.
Okay, but I think that Stacey Abrams does, she's the commanding general right now for Georgia Democrats, and it's her decision to make about whether she runs against Perdue or runs for president. I don't think she's going to run for president. I think she's still holding off on Perdue because she doesn't want to give him a running start. And she's still making her rounds around the country for her book tour. So she said she was going to make a decision in April, but now she's put that off and said she might wait until fall after Labor Day to decide what to do. So it's going to be interesting to see what she does decide to do. But my guess is she's going to run against Perdue.
And Phil, as she's on this national book tour, we see there's a new AJC poll out this week, an exclusive poll for the AJC, that says her favorability ratings are dropping. Went from 52 to 45% since January. Are you surprised? I know you have some issues with the polling, but are you surprised?
I do have a lot of issues with the polling. It's done over at the University of Georgia, and I'm not going to blame them, and I'm not going to blame the AJC, the paper, for running the poll. But the key to looking at any poll, as we all know, is look at the crosstabs. And they don't usually, no one publishes the crosstabs unless you click on a link and then you can look at it. Well, if you look at it, polling is done by weighting. What did they do? They weighted far more young people. They also used registered voters in Georgia as opposed to those likely to vote. That is not a good thing. I actually talked to Matt Towery, the former Fox 5 political analyst and former pollster in Florida, and he said this needs to be discounted, the whole poll. They actually overweighted, I don't understand this, I looked at it, the Democrats. Why would you do that? And so I think all of these numbers, whether it's Stacey Abrams, whether it's President Trump's approval rating, they had Trump low in Georgia. He's had 51% and 40% in the national polls. How can he be 15 points under in Georgia? The whole thing is garbage, and I think the University of Georgia ought to get out of the polling business.
Well, even though they weighted it, I think Governor Brian Kemp's approval ratings went up, and Senator David Perdue is at 47%, which is pretty good for an incumbent who is going to be up for re-election.
Well, and you could argue, yes, but again, why didn't you weight it more toward the Republicans, and why weight it more toward the Democrats?
Well, Phil, I hope you don't want to go to too many football games this upcoming year. You're hitting your alma mater pretty hard on their polling.
I just said I don't blame University of
Georgia.
Well,
I want the president Moorhead, who I know who watches this show. I would be more than happy to come to any of your football games.
They need to close down that polling, President
Give
Moorhead.
me Phil's spot. Give me Phil's spot.
And I married into the Georgia family. So.
But real quick, Lori, I think that, listen, the bottom line is this. Polls really at this point don't matter. But to get back to Teresa Tomlinson, she's been rumored to be a candidate for a lot of different statewide offices for the last 3 years in this state. So it looks like now that she's actually going to take that quantum leap and actually run. But we all know, look, if Stacey Abrams decides to run, or any candidate of color, in a Democratic primary, then that person, he or she, is probably more than likely going to be the nominee. So I think that's what Teresa Tomlinson is sort of weighing.
So she said if Stacey gets in, she's not going to do it.
And she's playing a lot of deference. She's conveying a lot of deference to Stacey right now, basically saying, hey, I want to be open. But I think it's sort of a wait-and-see approach until we all know what Stacey Abrams is going to do.
Amico is also looking at it as well.
Isn't it, though, Tomlinson pressuring Stacey Abrams to make a decision? And
no, because if you have as much name recognition as Stacey Abrams has, as much money she spent, she can probably wait until the third or fourth quarter to really get in this race.
And while I know we talk a lot about Stacey Abrams, but this was an interesting development this week. And former Douglas prosecutor David Amati, who is now the new head of the Ethics Commission here in Georgia, says he will subpoena bank records from Stacey Abrams' campaign and the groups that raised money to help her. And this was almost like his first day on the job. I mean, he clearly has...
Well, it's not political, although politics is a part of it. However, you need to be even-handed in your politics. Stefan Ritter, the predecessor of David Amati, was accused, and one of the reasons he was fired, of slow-walking the Abrams investigations and other Democrat and Republican investigations. That was a huge problem. And so I think David Amati deserves a lot of credit for saying, wait a minute, we're not slow-walking, we're opening up some of these things right away. He's the executive director, by the way. He's not the chairman.
Okay, sorry.
He certainly needs to be looking at the complaints against Brian Kemp's campaign.
Well, everybody.
As well.
The point is everybody.
But he announces just Stacey Abrams.
Well, because that was the main one that was slow walked by Stefan Ritter.
Well, I don't agree that that is a good reason to do that this way.
I think he's being. I think he is going across the board. You missed his statements, but this was a big one that they had missed.
Well, why didn't they say something during the campaign?
Well, because Stefan Ritter said there's nothing to it, and he filed it away.
But
Ritter was a Democrat.
It doesn't matter whether he was a Democrat or Republican. The bottom line is that I think you hit a really good point, is that Democrats and Republicans are going to be investigated. To Alexis's point, it's very interesting, not accusing this new executive director of any collusion or any type of anything, but it's very interesting. The first person out the gate is the Abrams campaign, and it could be largely because of a lot of different issues. But I think ultimately nowadays with running these type of massive campaigns, you know, you have to make sure that everything is done well with the funding and how the money is raised and how the money is spent. So I would hope that after going through the New Georgia Project stuff, that the Abrams campaign did everything they could to make sure that there was no funny business going on there with the raising the money and how the money was spent.
All right, well, coming up, the legislative issues we couldn't get to after Sine Die. We'll discuss Speaker Ralston and more coming up.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Before they left town, lawmakers passed a bill aimed at fixing a problem involving House Speaker David Ralston. This stems, of course, from an AJC investigation which showed House Speaker David Ralston cited his legislative duties for delaying court cases for the accused criminals he was defending. Victims have accused him of delaying justice in many cases for years. Now, Phil, what is kind of this new plan, and do you think it's tough enough? Because it also relies a lot on prosecutors and judges, and they may be a little bit gun shy to go after, you know, one of the most prominent and one of the most powerful men in the state.
That's right. Just to set the stage, legislators, including the Speaker, can delay cases, and this has resulted in a problem, as you point out, that years and years these cases are being delayed. And so the legislature, with the Speaker's support, is trying to fix that, and that did pass.
Well, he appointed a committee.
He appointed a committee,
to come together.
and you are right. You've heard me say I blame judges. They can also set. It's in the law now that they can just say, you know, Mr. Johnson, you can't come in May or June or July, but you need to give me an August date, and we're going to do it. And
but
so
that's why a lot of the victims are upset about this solution, because they think that these judges will not go after Speaker
and that's
Ralston.
right. And this is what my free advice to the Speaker is: let's get these cases cleared up quickly. The session's now over. I think he has a window to do this, and I think that that would make a lot of people happy.
Well, I also think that he needs to do something, because he has been, the word on the street is to hire Ralston because you'll never have to go to court. So they need to fix that, and he needs to fix that.
Well, and this definitely sets the rules, Theron, that while they are in session, the attorneys do not have to be in court. And then I think it's a week after session or a week before session are the rules too.
Correct. And then this bill is a step in the right direction. And, you know, for our viewers, let's remind you, there was a few members of the House, particularly Representative Turner and Representative Stover, who I've talked to at the Capitol, that led this effort to really push the Speaker to and let's not forget, the Speaker sort of proactively created this committee because he knew it was a problem. But this
proactively.
Bill, I think after it was disclosed that this law was being sort of used, some say abusively, some say not. He then proactively said, hey, I'm going to appoint this committee. But then you had these representatives who are Republicans who basically called for him to resign. They also, I think, introduced a bill to try to make the position of Speaker and Lieutenant Governor full-time. That didn't go. So I think the bottom line now is, and Phil is actually giving the Speaker some good advice, is that continue to be as transparent as you can about this process. But I just want to say that I think that the Speaker is in the process of closing out these cases that have been open for some time. And if he's not, then he's going to have to come forward and explain why they're open. But the bottom line is that now lawyers in the legislature, during the time of the legislation, and you're right, Lori, a couple weeks after, can be granted to this leave. And I think now what it's going to do is going to really make all the lawyers in the legislature make sure that they are mindful of how this can be optically perceived if you have too many cases building up and you're not attending to them. So I think it's a step in the right direction.
And I want to touch on another issue we didn't get a chance to discuss last week because we had so much going on. But Brian Kemp, the governor, quietly signed the voting bill. Why do you think that is, Theron? I mean, this is one of the biggest issues to come out of his election last year, and this was done, I think it was on sine die in his back office, and nothing public about it.
It's another topic for the Ethics Commission.
Well,
he can do that.
But I mean,
you can have a ceremony, or you not have a ceremony for a bill signing.
And correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I think he instantly signed some bills like during the session, right away. But this one, look, I think at the end of the day, he just wanted to kind of move forward with it. We know it was a lot of conversations about the voting machine, but I think also it shows some deference to Secretary Raffensperger, who's actually going to now have to go out and make sure that these machines are ready, that they're paid for, and that Georgians feel that their elections are secure and that every vote is being counted.
Well, and that's right. And of course, to your point, Secretary Raffensperger is now looking at vendors for the software to...
This is where it gets a little...
And this is where it gets more... We'll be talking about this.
Yes, we will.
And how the selection is going to be made and what type of selection is going to be made. But I think from a communications standpoint, I think he wanted to sign it right away, so not to give the opposition time to like Alexis, to beat up on it.
Well, it is $150 million of new machines, and there's that argument between the ballot marking and the paper ballots. So it looks like we're going ahead with the machines. I also wanted to talk about changes, and Theron, I'm going to come to you on this one. Changes at DeKalb's purchasing department. There's going to be a new structure in place. CEO Michael Thurmond has put this in place.
This is a big win for DeKalb this week. You may remember, Lori, that there was an audit that was produced before CEO Thurmond took office and basically showed that there were some recommendations that were not done. So what I'm happy to report is that since he's been CEO, he's definitely made some recommendations, some changes in the purchasing department. But there was also a move by the commission to try to restructure the purchasing limits, and so it was deemed at that time a violation of the charter. But now even Commissioner Gannon, Kathy Gannon, praised this CEO for basically working with the commission to find a good compromise to make sure that the purchasing in DeKalb County is still being done properly and going forward. So it was a big win of them working together this week.
All right, great. Well, up next, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And we all agree on our first winner this week, and that is former host of the Georgia Gang, Dick Williams, who announced the print edition of the Dunwoody Crier is coming to a close. And this is quite an announcement. And it's really tough for journalism.
Well, it is. That was an independent community newspaper, and we're losing many of them now. The business models aren't working, sad to say. It was a great watchdog, though, for that community.
It was. And plus, it's still going to be published digitally
edition. Theron, winners.
All right, so Mayor Schroeder is going to be my first winner. He announced this week that he was going to be retiring as Dunwoody's mayor. But during that retirement announcement, he honored Dick and honored the Dunwoody Crier. So I agree with all of you guys that definitely the Crier is a winner, but also Mayor Schroeder. Also, Congressman John Lewis had an airport tribute of an exhibit wall and to basically kind of talk about all the different civil rights activities and things that he's so widely known for around the world. So it's amazing walls on the domestic terminal near the atrium. And then Phil, a good friend of ours, Mr. Marco Beatty over at Antica Pasta. I had a chance to go and eat there, and he mentioned that you come in there pretty often. He said you always pay the bill, and so that's a good thing.
I always order the right wing of chicken.
That's right.
Did you put it on Phil's tab?
Yeah. Well, they said Phil's tab was a little shaky. So
he wants free stuff.
But he's a person who watches the show, and also a good friend of mine, a gentleman by the name of Shaka Zulu. He was the manager for Ludacris, who we know is one of our Atlanta-owned hip-hop artists. Shaka Zulu was named as Spotify head of artist and talent relations, and so he's an amazing guy. And then lastly, I want to recognize two other winners. Is Nipsey Hussle, of course. He was buried. It was unfortunately murdered in Los Angeles. Had a wonderful tribute and a funeral. And then also two winners. I want to make sure Senator Kauser and my good friend Senator Quinn had a chance to be with them over in Athens, Georgia, and they were at the Federation of Neighborhoods. And so these two senators went into what I call the lion's den. It took some tough questions from some Democratic members of Athens and also some Republicans, but they are doing what a lot of senators and representatives are doing now, going back home and explaining their votes, but also explaining this legislative session. So I want to give them a big shout out and being courageous and staying to it and agreeing to disagree in that audience.
Good for them. Phil.
Very quickly, the winners, of course, the Masters tournament. We don't know who the winner is going to be on Sunday yet, but we do know that it's been a fantastic tournament so far. And the Red Carpet Tour, which is sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Department, is huge. They always go over there and try to get industry. Also, that loser is the congestion tax by this Atlanta City Councilman, J.P. Messkite. I can't believe that this insane proposal, he wants to just tax people coming into the Buckhead section of Atlanta and the Midtown section, and that's just not going to work.
All right, Alexis, you're up.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Levon Hawkins. He passed this week. He had fast food restaurants here in Atlanta, but he was a Detroit native, and he died in Detroit after opening up a restaurant there, so he'll be missed. And also, I want to congratulate the Thurl High School Panthers. They're state champions for the first time in the history of the school in the basketball.
That's
Congratulations.
Awesome. And since Phil kind of dogged UGA earlier, I'm going to give a shout out to UGA. Mary Frances Early, they want to name their College of Education after her. Of course, she was the first African American to earn a degree from UGA. So big congratulations to her, a big shout out. And thank you all so much for joining us this week. We will see you next week with a lot more topics to discuss.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.